Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the Application Packaging Experts Roundtable. We have everyone muted as per usual. You can send questions in the chat. In fact, we'd really like you to. We're going to, we anticipate more time for Q&A in this session than some previous ones. So we'd especially like your questions, and they need not be limited to the topic that we've brought to the table today. Video will also be provided following the event, and you can find a repository of all the past recordings on the registration page. Hopefully when you signed up, you checked the box to register for all future events, but this time we intend to open registration for the next session much sooner. So we'll get the video of this session up and the ability to register for the next one within the next day or so. My name is Bob Kelly. I am the product manager for AdminStudio, software vulnerability management, and our security offerings at Flexera. I also have with me Kieran, and I won't point out that it's his birthday because he doesn't want me to.
Thank you, Bob. I'm Kieran Mantri, product manager for AdminStudio at Flexera. Welcome you all for the first roundtables of the year. Hope you all had a great new year. Mike?
Yeah, Mike O'Connor, Senior Solutions Engineer. So happy to be here today, and happy birthday, Kieran.
Happy birthday, Kieran. My name is Sunny Lee. I'm one of the account managers here at Flexera, and I'm glad everyone's on this webinar. Happy New Year to everyone.
Thanks all. We got a good team as usual, and today we've got Mike O'Connor taking the lead seat on the topic to talk about managed applications with a live demo. So wish him good luck. You know how live demos go.
That's right. So if you joined us back in May of last year, so about 8 months ago or so, one of the topics we talked then was about this idea of managed applications. So the idea of a managed application is something that you're aware of, and it's been prepared by the IT team. So you have managed applications. These are the ones that you and your team have worked on, have been prepared, or they're approved for use in the environment. They've gone through all the licensing and procurement and security analysis and everything else. You probably, for at least many of them, or maybe the specialty applications, you have a subject matter expert or application owner that knows about the application. So these are the apps that you're generally somebody has their finger on the pulse of, versus, comparing that to unmanaged applications. Those are applications that haven't gone through that process, right? They're the reverse of it. And they may make its way on, many organizations. Some still do have, give all their users admin rights. So it's just easier to give them that access. But that also means that they were able to install whatever they wanted in the environment, whether or not it's work-related, whether or not it's officially licensed and sanctioned by the organization. So you've got managed applications, and you've got awareness to those, and then the unmanaged applications, you may not necessarily know exactly what's out there, and part of that is being updated. So even if serves a work purpose, if it's not being updated periodically, that could add some risk and some challenges to the organization.
And another thing, Mike, we do see a lot less customers giving their end users admin rights.
Right.
That was common, and it got a little better and a little better over time. Right. But now there's applications that you can install in a user context, from the App Store, or even that just install into your profile. So you're not necessarily limited from installing your own applications, even when the system is locked down from a permissions perspective. And those applications too, don't all update themselves automatically and need to be understood to be tracked.
Right. Exactly. So, the idea here is, and what we've heard from a lot of customers is, we need to bring more of those unmanaged applications into the sphere of being managed so that we're aware of everything in the environment and that everything is being, updated. But it's a big task to know what you have, what's out there, correlate that with what you already have known, and be able to bring that under complete management of everything out in the environment. So that's a good question, right? Is how do I do, as I said, so unmanaged applications, whether you know them or not, they still impact your environment. So how do you bring those under management, right? How do you
particularly
bring
I'm more concerned about the new updates. What generally happens is if you bring in a new update without going through a proper process, you would not know what it's going to break. And there is a good possibility of a downtime. Now, the new version might have some conflicting app on your device, or it could break something else. Let's say there is a new version of Java, right? And there is a possibility that it might break something. So if it's a brand new application that you're installing and it is unmanaged, of course the risk is high, but the update I feel is going to be a lot riskier. So I think a proper process has to be followed if you intend to update your existing version on the device. So that I see and also hear that it generally comes as a surprise where you're not prepared yourself for it.
Yeah. Management means you're aware of the updates available. You know what it's going to operate, and then you want to make sure that you're eliminating that downtime and the extra help desk tickets and things that can come about when you have an unknown problem or challenge that comes up when it comes to updating applications, for sure.
Right, and also of course the consistency. Right now, if IT has more control over the updates, then the entire organization, all the devices will be on a single version. Now, if it's unmanaged, then you will see a version sprawl, what we call in the other product, the IT visibility world, right? So we'll end up having too many versions of the same application spread across your org, which is of course a nightmare to manage.
Right. Yeah. Now you got to take care of 5 different versions instead of just 1 or 2 potentially.
Right.
Yeah. So all those and more are challenges, and so how do we eliminate that, or at least reduce that challenges and those additional risks? So how do I bring those unmanaged, unknown applications, or at least those that aren't under that consistent, regular process that we have for the managed apps? Well, of course, you have to know first what's unmanaged, what's in your environment that's to be aware of, instead of every application that exists in the world. Of course, let's narrow that down to ones that are impacting my environment that are in there already, whether I push them out or got them through other means. So how you do that? Well, you got to have data. You got to have information to understand, what's in your environment and correlate that with, is that a managed application or is that currently unmanaged, and bringing that into the managed space. So, different ways you could do that. Many of you likely have, your deployment systems also serve as an inventory mechanism. So you're probably getting inventory reports from anything from like Configuration Manager, SCCM or Intune or Workspace ONE or BigFix or some of these other sources. You might have an IT service management system that's pulling that information in there. You might have some type of software asset management solution. Flexera has a solution for that. And if all else, the good old-fashioned reliable spreadsheets, where you're probably pulling from those other systems, exporting the data, and then doing a bunch of pivot tables and other management to see what's there. Although, as you know, that data quickly can go out of date, and it's tedious and challenging to get it formatted just the right way and to work off of it. I know a story of a colleague of mine that used to work for a large insurance company, and they would do they would do this export, and they would print it out on paper and go through and cross out when they're going through and managing and updating them. Of course, that is almost immediately, as soon as it's printed, is out of date. So how do you pull in the most recent data that's current and work off of it? So that's one of the challenges a lot of people see. So a lot of data can come in from these systems, but all that data, doesn't necessarily line up with what you know about it, right? The naming conventions, what's an add remove programs, versus what's the package name versus maybe what you have it in a CMDB or other source of where you track your managed applications can all vary and different. So that can be challenges there. And, you just have that extra data to sift through. You might get so much information and about these applications that aren't necessarily relevant for the task of bringing them under management. Or, you get a lot of middleware applications that are important to update, but, I don't necessarily need to see every, C++ library, or it might be pulling in information about that's basically built into the operating system, but shows up as separate apps. And it's a lot of data to go through. So,
inventory is just generally noisy, right? Like if you just do like a WMI, what's on my system, or you look in, the add remove programs details, you end up with a lot of things that are noise. And, that coupled with the fact that a simple inventory capability is included with a lot of things. So each company probably has 2, 3, 4 different tools that collect inventory in some way, to varying degrees and varying levels of detail, and then, like you say, are potentially inconsistent in the way they reference the application, which can make them a challenge to reconcile against one another.
Exactly.
I remember in our last organization, I remember this very clearly. One of the IT engineers would walk up to your desk, log into your computer using their admin privileges, and I think it was a VB script. They ran a VB script and it would spit out an Excel sheet. Now just imagine the IT engineer going to each device, getting those Excel sheets, putting them all together and reconciling. My God.
Yeah, and you could have installed something you needed for your task the next day, and then you're already that spreadsheet that you pulled yesterday is out of date.
It's already out of date. Yeah.
Right. So, yep, I've heard that a lot of challenges too. So exactly, is how do you get this data? How is it current and relevant to what you need it for? And with the right information, and kind of putting the rest off to the side, so you can actually act on it. That's the thing, is information is great, but if it's not in a format that's actionable, it makes it difficult to do anything with it, right? So then it comes the question of, well, what do I package, right? So now I got inventory information. So now I know what I have, but then what needs to be updated, right? Those systems usually tell you have version 23 of this application. Okay, is that the current release, or is there an update to that, or is there vulnerabilities with it, or is there is that something I need to work on now, or is that something that's good for now and I can move on to the next application? So knowing what to do is again, relying on different sources of information, using that inventory list and going through and manually looking everything up. As mentioned, you might have application owners, at least for your more, specific applications that apply to specific groups, and maybe you manage the general, Adobe Reader and Chrome, or everybody gets it, so it's kind of under more IT management. But you might have the specialty financial or engineering or commercial, applications that are for specific groups. Then you probably lean on an application owner for them to stay up to date and at least know what's the current release, and is it time to update now, or can we push that off a bit? You're probably getting security assessments, right? You've got a security team. They're likely using some type of vulnerability scanning tool, so another inventory source to specifically look at what software is there, tie that in with known vulnerability information to say, hey, this application's out of date and it poses a potential threat to our environment. We got to update it. So, and usually those are kind of surprised on the packaging team. Hey, drop everything, work on this application because there's a vulnerability with it, and some people are being attacked potentially with it because of it. So, And it's kind of like, okay, drop everything, work on that, and then switch back. So it's a lot of reactive approach to it. Subscribing to newsletters and other information. Maybe the app itself provides notification as well. So there's a lot of different sources, depending on the app, depending on how it operates, what information the vendor shares with it, or relying on others within the organization to stay up to date with it. Cobbling it together, it works to an extent, but again, it's kind of an ad hoc manual process, and it's not something that makes it easy to repeatable and keep an application under management.
And another thing I see adds to the complexity of keeping up with the latest version is that a lot of the inventory sources that you might rely upon aren't very granular, right? So you might see you've got version 23, but how many versions of 23 are there? And how many versions of 23 are in your environment? And how many of those are end of life or have a known vulnerability? It can be, it requires often more investigation. So you'll know that there's a potential vulnerability because you've got version 23 and there are insecure versions of that, but without digging or looking at a more detailed resource for inventory, you may not know the specific, detailed version that you have installed to determine if it's at risk or not.
So with all that in mind, right, how do we assess the managed applications that are currently in our purview and bringing those unmanaged applications under management? So, the questions that come up are, okay, so if we figure out an application, it needs an update. Do we have a vendor setup package for it? Do we know what, sometimes vendors release functional updates kind of to add new features and capabilities versus sometimes they release patches to fix security vulnerabilities. Do you know which ones are available? So a lot of times the security ones are let's push that out immediately versus functional ones. Probably those necessarily can wait maybe till our next monthly or quarterly cycle. So how do you know what's available there? And then if it's an application that we don't want because maybe it's unmanaged and it's not supported and it doesn't serve a work purpose, or it's been superseded by a different application that performs similar operations, is it time to remove it? Just take it off of the environment. Because if we leave it there, again, it adds risk to the organization through the potential for vulnerabilities, but also just additional help desk tickets of having to support yet another application. So knowing that information is important too. And then, if an application is still supported by the vendor, do we know if that specific version is supported? Is 23 under support still? Or, some vendors support multiple versions simultaneously and allow you to kind of migrate over time. In other applications, Chrome being an example, is nope, we moved from 107 to 108. 107 is gone. We're not supporting 107 anymore. No, we won't have updates for that. So, again, knowing an application, is it ready to upgrade? Whether or not we, maybe it doesn't have vulnerabilities with it, doesn't pose a challenge that way. The new features are nice, but if it's not under support, and we run into an issue and we can't get that support from the vendor, that's a challenge too. So keeping applications up to date so they're supported is another, and having that information right off the bat versus having to, again, do those manual pulls and try to load all that information in can be challenging for sure.
You mentioned patching too, which kind of makes me want to articulate the idea that a patch is sort of an antiquated term, or even tech today. In almost every case, a new version or a patch, or the way you remediate vulnerable software, is to install a new version, not necessarily patch the old one. So often the setup would be smart enough to just update what needs to be updated and retain settings and retain preferences. And so you're just refreshing the files that make up the application so that it's now at the new version. Some organizations I've seen, particularly if you repackage, you may not be able to benefit from that more thoughtful update of the software. You may need to rip and replace, do an uninstall, do an install, and that way you've got a clean installation. I think Adobe is pretty much the only one hanging on to the Microsoft Patch MSP format for updates, and you can of course apply that update to the MSI, and now you've got an update, full updated version that you can deploy. So even in that one case, that's probably the most common of the few that still do it. You can still get to consistency in terms of there's a new application, there's a new full setup, and not something that you have to manage differently.
Yeah, and that partially comes by the change in philosophy, right, of releasing software, right, where it used to be you'd have maybe one release a year, or probably maybe every 2 or 3, and so you could do those smaller, byte difference, updates of patching a single DLL or other part of the application because we don't have a major release for another year or 2, so we can do these smaller ones. Where now, Chrome, right, every 4 weeks, I think now it's every there's always a new release, so they don't have the time to we'll do a small update that just fixes one part of it. No, we'll just release a new one every single time. It's a new release. Right. So if you don't have it before, it's new to you, great, it installs and you got everything. Otherwise, like you said, it does that difference and upgrades an existing application, and it's just coming out much more frequently.
Yeah, the benefits of a patch made sense a long time ago when bandwidth and drive space were at a premium. But now everybody's got terabytes of space and lightning fast download speeds. It just isn't worth the trouble.
Yeah, I'll say for when I first started previously, before it was Flexera, when it was with AdminStudio, we released on DVD, and that was probably a major release we had, and then we had updates that you could download from the website as well as the full release. But a lot of people still like to have the DVD to install it back then because of bandwidth restrictions and so forth. But now most people have high speed, and you can download a gig in a few minutes, and that's
I remember that was one of the first patch warning situations that came up, was if you get a printer and it comes with a driver on a disk, the first thing you do after you install that driver is get the updated driver, because whatever media you received is almost certainly multiple revs old.
Drivers are always fun because that's software managing with or interacting with hardware, and they don't necessarily find all the challenges. So exactly right. Yeah,
it's a pain.
Go ahead, Karen.
Adding to this list of assessment, I think it becomes also important that you'll have to assess if your unmanaged application that you're wanting to bring under your management supports all your customizations. Right? Is there enough command line switches made available by the vendor to support your customizations? Or even as simple as just a silent installation, right? Let's say you don't add any additional customizations, but it's a standard practice that you want to, if you have, or if you're using any of the endpoint management systems, like let's say Configuration Manager or Intune, you want to achieve silent installation. So that also, I think, will be another important assessment that you have to do. And I generally see there is many hours that the IT team generally spends trying to figure out those right switches that meet all their deployment needs for all these new applications.
And then you never know when it's going to change too. Because I think you get to a point where you've fought that battle with each application, but then a new version comes out and you cross your fingers it still works the way the last one did. But the bigger the portfolio of applications you have, the more likely there's 1 or 2 in there that are going to give you a surprise. But we've exhausted the need for testing in previous sessions. So. You got a demo for us, Mike?
Yeah. So what we thought with all that in mind, like, okay, so we got all these different inputs of information, and they don't, depending on how I do it, they're not always up to date. And how do I know information about new releases and all that? So we thought we'd just do a quick demonstration. One method, there's other ones out there, but one method that Flexera offers that is a nice kind of complete solution around this is the idea of being able to take in your inventory information, be able to kind of normalize it, clean it up, and then add on top of curated market intelligence that we collect. We have an in-house team that collects this information and keeps it updated every day. So you know exactly what you have in your environment, what's current, what's not, what version you have, and then be able to send those applications in a nice, easy to understand report, send it directly over to AdminStudio, which is our packaging solution. So it can go into a queue and get updated, not only just send it over to a queue, but also compare that against with an offering we have called the package feed, where we're constantly updating daily, over, I think it's total of 4,000 some odd software packages that get updated all the time. So you can quickly get the latest version of that application that you found in your report that's in your environment, and be able to quickly get that out to your end users and get more of your applications that may be unmanaged into that managed state, and in a repeatable process that meets your needs. All right, so let's give this a try. Let's see if I can share my screen here. And I'll rely on my colleagues to let me know. Is that coming in for you?
We are seeing it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think there's a little bit of delay, so I'll try to pause and when I'm going in through stuff. So this is Flexera 1. This is a SaaS or web application that we can log into. There's different components to Flexera 1. What I'm going to be speaking about today is the IT visibility section. So IT visibility as a solution, as mentioned, is it can take in different inventory from different sources. It normalizes that against what we call our Technopedia library. So this is known of millions of data points within Technopedia across hundreds of thousands of applications, I believe. And it can quickly pull in that information in your environment and marry some additional data on top of it to help you understand what you have in your environment. So we're working off of a normalized, consistent list of applications, and we can add in information like you can see, for example, both software and hardware. Things like, is it generally available? Is an application that has met its end of life date, so it doesn't have full support from the vendor, but still getting at least limited support, maybe under an additional cost from the vendor, or is it just completely obsolete, meaning it's not supported by the vendor? They're not going to touch it anymore. So is that software I want to keep in my environment, or do I want to update that to the latest version of that vendor, or maybe replace it with another application that serves that purpose, or just needs to remove it, don't need it anymore. So we're taking that inventory and giving you, and you can see there's a lot of different dashboards you can see. This is a kind of the executive summary. You can filter on this by manufacturer, whatever, and get additional details, but understand the risk in your environment. And so we can try to solve for some of that. And so among all the other dashboards that are in here, there's lots of different ones. You can see for business context, and currency, and everything. I'm going to go down to Insight to Action, and we have this report called End of Life. And so what this report will show you, once it loads up. So this is a list of all the applications in my environment. I pulled in from inventory, I've normalized it, and I've added from our Technopedia source, we have calculated the life cycle end date. So this is information from the vendor of whether that application and that version is still under their support, or if it's fallen to that end of life or obsoleteness. And I can filter this, like I said, further. So for example, I've got some Microsoft applications in here, and Microsoft usually you kind of manage separately from the third-party application. So just for the purposes of this, I'll filter out anything that has Microsoft But that's a good point. Part of that normalization is some apps show up as Microsoft, Microsoft Corp, Microsoft Corporation. We're through the normalization where we have a consistent naming convention. So if it's from Microsoft, then it's got that name there. So filtering out Microsoft, you can see I've got some applications in my environment, and you can see how many installs there are, and it's sorted by, show me the one that's got the largest footprint in my environment, and go down from there. And I'm showing just ones that are obsolete and end of life here. So I've got Adobe Reader, I've got Global Protect and Chrome and some of these other applications. So I want to figure out, I either probably remove these applications or send a request over to my IT operations team so that they can package a new version and push that out to my environment. So switch over to AdminStudio real quick before I do anything else. So this is AdminStudio. This is a view called the backlog. The backlog is kind of your packaging queue of the applications that you're currently working on. And I've got some applications in my queue, but I want to add some more to it. And specifically, I want to get those applications that are from that insight to action report in IT visibility over to here so my team can start working on it. And, see if any of those applications we have that Flexera offers in its packaging feed to make it even easier to get to those new releases. That contains not only the installer, but the install and uninstall command line options that Bob and Kieran were talking about that sometimes can change, and the ability to add customizations through transform files for those MSIs. Makes it real easy to, let's get a new application that we haven't managed up to this point into our queue, put it under management, get it all customized, ready to go, and then get it out the door. So then that way, over time, that list of applications, we're getting rid of those obsolete and end-of-life applications and replacing them with currently supported versions. Bob, Karen, anything you guys want to add up to this point?
Just to say that, while this is IT visibility, Flexera's product that we're talking about, the concept of the backlog in AdminStudio, this is just a really good use case of it. Obviously, we're in a position to take advantage of it and make sure it works the way we planned it to, but you can add to that backlog using an API, using CSV import, using a PowerShell commandlet. So there's intentionally a large number of different ways you could go about populating this backlog. And so this works as a good functional example.
Exactly. A lot of different entry points into this, but this is kind of the more, it bridges that gap between those that are managing the assets and the packaging team. But yeah, absolutely. There's lots of different ways you can utilize this backlog. All right. So Karen, you were going to say something?
No, I was saying IT visibility is one example where you could integrate the backlog tab as a third party. Like I'm calling IT visibility as third party here because it's outside of AdminStudio. So similarly, you could integrate with any other systems. It's very common to have a ticketing system in any organization, and generally you have tickets raised for, let's say, new software updates or let's say new software request altogether. Right? So you could integrate AdminStudio or the backlog tab into those ticketing systems using the APIs, AdminStudio APIs. And when a ticket for, let's say, a new software is submitted in your system, it could directly send a request and add to your backlog. So the AdminStudio team knows there is a new request and they start working right away. So there is no delay, and the easy integration helps get the work through.
All right. So yeah, absolutely. So again, lots of different ways to utilize the backlog. One method, if you have AdminStudio and you have our IT visibility, you can see there's this request update button over here. So I can, over here, I can just click this, and this is the information we're going to send over to AdminStudio. So maybe I have my asset manager hat on. They're using IT visibility to better understand the environment and better understand the risks and reduce those risks. So I can just click the send button, and you can see that sends a request to the latest version of, in this case, Adobe Reader over to AdminStudio backlog for processing. And maybe I'll do a few other ones too. So I'll do Google Chrome here. Maybe I'll do the Cisco WebEx. I'll send that over. And then I think I saw Firefox over here. So I'll do those 4 just as a quick example. So I send those 4 over to, that's all I had to do as the software asset manager. I said, update request, yep, send that over to the packaging team. So now putting my packaging hat on, I load my AdminStudio environment, I see what's there. In this case, I do a quick refresh, and in a few seconds, you can see that those applications I just clicked on from the IT visibility report are now showed up in my packaging queue. So I didn't have to do a manual export of that and send it over, or some other methods. I could have, if I've got, inventory systems, I could export that data and load it in here. But having IT visibility is a nice direct way to establish that connection, send it right over. So I've got Adobe Reader, Chrome, Cisco productivity tools, and Mozilla Firefox. And you can see the versions that were there over there showed up here too. Version catalog. So in my example here, I don't have any of these applications in my application catalog. That's the SQL database that AdminStudio uses as its backend to kind of bring in your applications and use it as kind of a workspace to prepare all the applications. So currently we don't have any locally, and that's okay. They're net new. Let's pretend these applications weren't yet under my management, so they weren't being prepared. They're out in my environment, but they weren't being prepared up to this point through our method using AdminStudio here. And then I say version and package feed. So this is what does Flexera offer right now, currently in our package feed about these, if we have any of these applications, and we do. So you can see we've got Adobe Reader DC. Chrome, there's a couple different editions of it. There's Chrome for Business and Chrome for Education, and they still release 32 as well as 64-bit versions. So I'll choose the Chrome for Business 64-bit version. Just one version for WebEx. And then Firefox, there's a few different languages. So in the US, so I'll choose the English US version. And then I can quickly hit save. And I've done that one-time matchup. That's the only time I really have to do that. And then moving forward, we'll know what Google Chrome matches up with this version of Chrome, and that's what we'll use. Now we can download this, prepare it, and then when new versions come up in the package feed, we'll always link to the latest version there. A couple other things.
Perfect world would be to subscribe to all of these, right? So they never get out of date again. So that's the easy path to evergreen. Is if it's in the package feed, you can just say subscribe, and then AdminStudio allows you to configure what subscribe means. So that could mean wrapping it in PowerShell Deploy Toolkit. It could mean publishing it to Intune or configuration management, something else. Could mean converting it to MSIX. All these things can be very simply selected and automated as new versions appear, which is pretty quickly after the vendor releases it. It will show up here, and then your automation can pick it up.
Exactly. Yeah, so we can quickly layer as much automation on top of it as you want. And a lot of packaging teams are kind of a little weary of automating, everything end to end, at least at first. So you can start with let's just download it. Download it with the latest, with the silent command line switches, be able to customize it with a transform file. And then over time, and maybe not for every application, but certainly the ones that are consistent, don't really change that much in terms of customizing and silent command line switches, you can layer up and add additional automations on top of it, like testing and wrapping and converting to MSIX, and or up to including publishing out to your distribution system of choice. So to your config manager or Intune or Workspace ONE, or you could have a custom connection here as well. And then you can set as Bob said, you can set up a subscribe, and then you can set up a schedule on which you want to automatically check in. So maybe every day, maybe a few times a week, like I have here. Maybe Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 4:30, or over the weekend or whenever. Or so you can set your schedule, and then anything that's set to subscribe will automatically be checked in, see if there's a new version. If the version that's in package feed is the same that we have locally, then we're good. Don't need to do anything new. But if there is a new version in the package feed, let's go ahead and download it. And to Bob's point, do all that other automation that you want it to, up to and including, if it's all good to go, put it directly in the distribution system. And then just mention you can also subscribe to and add a local folder. So for any internal applications that your organization writes, or there's specialty applications or things we won't be able to have it directly in the package feed, you can drop those kind of in a Dropbox into the folder, and AdminStudio will periodically look in and see if there's any new applications and pull those in, and then you can perform those additional actions on top of those, just like you could with anything that's coming from the package feed. So while we know we'll never get to 100%, no patch catalog or application update catalog has everything between what we have in the package feed, which is one of the largest out there, as well as the monitor directory. We can cover all the applications that go through your management process.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this because it's the best of both worlds, right? The idea of a catalog is promising, but you're lucky if you get a third of your packages. But AdminStudio is the place where you would handle the rest of those. So with the additional automation we've layered in, there's you should be able to automate the majority of the applications in your environment now.
That's right. Yeah. So I can select these. I can click execute. It'll take a few minutes, but so probably won't go through the whole waiting process, but it'll download those applications. Anything with the pencil icon, you can easily create a customize, go through the customization wizard, and these will create a transform file with these changes applied to it. And then we'll remember that for every subsequent version after that. So unless you want to go back and make any changes, once you kind of set this up, again, it becomes an automated scheduled process. And this will take it all the way to distribution. You'll push it out to your end users. And then, of course, over time, you'll see this report will get updated as we're pulling in the latest inventory, say weekly or whatever. And then you'll see these numbers start to drop as you replace those obsolete and end-of-life applications with the current supported versions. So, and you don't have to do this every single time, right? Once I've added it to the backlog, AdminStudio is going to stay up to date with it moving forward. So you'll reduce those applications in that inside action report that are obsolete and end of life by bringing it here and bringing it under management here in the backlog. All right. Anything I may have missed, Kieran, Bob?
No, I think you got it.
You got it.
Well, it took a little bit more time than we thought, but that's a good, hopefully that was helpful. And yeah, so we'll jump over to, push over to Q&A.
I'm not seeing many questions so far.
Okay.
We could always end early, but it would be great. And again, the questions need not be related to
Sure.
Flexera 1 or IT visibility or even managed applications. Anything package related is fair game.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was pretty awesome, Mike. One thing I thought of that I'm pretty curious about is how easy is that to set up in terms of getting that insight to action from that IT visibility solution that you mentioned to AdminStudio?
Sure. Well, to reiterate what Kieran said, on the AdminStudio side, there is a set of REST APIs that are available that other systems can tap into, but that's what we're leveraging. That's what I was using today with IT visibility. So on the IT visibility side, if you're a current customer of that, I think it's just kind of a newer functionality. So it's a little bit of I think it's kind of we'll call it a white glove approach where we can set it up, but really all it is telling IT visibility, providing the URL information to have that go back to your instance of AdminStudio. And once that's configured, as long as AdminStudio is running and available, The REST APIs are available, and IT Visibility can send that information directly over to it. Yeah, so pretty quick.
And Mike, it's really a one-time
Mm-hmm.
and after that, it's just about clicking those buttons. So
Right.
I would not imagine that to be really complex.
Yep. Obviously, you got to have, so IT Visibility is a SaaS application. Flexera is hosting that. AdminStudio would be hosted your environment, or if you have an Azure instance or something and you've got to install up there. So you got to have network, connection external that can come in to that environment wherever AdminStudio is being hosted. But if that's all established, then yeah, it's a one-time process. It's set up, it's ready to go, and easy to use.
We got a question from Luke. Hi, I'm
Sure.
pretty new to AdminStudio. It sounds like the main difference between SCCM packaging and AdminStudio is having the ability to keep the software up to date easier. Is that correct? Are there more differences, benefits of AdminStudio?
Yeah, and I've heard this a lot where people are, we've talking to customers, we talked about the value of AdminStudio, and they're like, oh, that's okay, we've got SCCM, or, SCCM used to be called System Center Configuration Manager. Now it's just Config Manager because it's no longer part of the System Center. But regardless, SCCM, Config Manager, whatever you call it. So I would say AdminStudio, it doesn't replace it. It doesn't, do anything differently what SCCM does. So SCCM is your distribution system. That's what you're loading your applications and packages, your MSIs and EXEs and MSIX packages into and doing the deployment. But SCCM doesn't really have a packaging system. It's a deployment, it's inventory, it does some great things, but getting an application, a package into a format that's ready, because not everything that you get directly from the vendor is in a state that can be easily deployed out, right? If you got an installer, a lot of times we still see, not as much as we used to, but we still see every once in a while vendor installers that work great if you're going to sit in front of it, double click it, and walk through the installer. But if I got to get it out to 1,000 end users, I can't do that, right? I need to have it install in a way that's silent, it's installed the way we need it in our org, and it's just done. And SCCM doesn't really, if you have the installer, you have the right silent command line switches, and there's scripts and free tools that you could use. But SCCM doesn't really have that way to help you further investigate and understand exactly and configure it completely, necessarily. Some apps, yeah, it's straightforward, it's easy enough. Put the MSI in there, throw a transform file on it, you're good to go. But other apps need a little bit more effort. So regardless of if you need a little bit or a lot, that's where I think AdminStudio is your pre-deployment solution to prepare that application all the way up to let's get it in SCCM, and then SCCM does the rest, does the deployment, reports back if it was successful or not, can be helpful with that inventory information. But AdminStudio is doing the preparation work, and then SCCM is doing that delivery work.
Yeah, think of AdminStudio as a solution to feed SCCM. SCCM is going to do your deployments for you, but it needs the packages that you care about configured the way you want them configured, wrapped the way you want them wrapped, or customized the way you want them customized, and always up to date. And that's not something Configuration Manager does on its own. That's something that AdminStudio provides to Configuration Manager. So there's no overlap there. It's just a symbiotic relationship.
Yeah, we're adding additional value on top of SCCM to make sure that it works even better than it does today. And that's true with the other distribution systems, Intune, Workspace ONE, anything you need to do, you need to do that preparation work, and that's what AdminStudio is, and then hand it off to the experts of SCCM or whatever to actually deliver it.
I see a question about PowerShell App Deploy Toolkit that comes up from time to time that I'd like to address, asking, is PowerShell App Deploy Toolkit now built into AdminStudio? The need to repackage apps is not high these days, but the ability to wrap and install is key. The answer is yes. It's been a couple of years now that we actually include the PowerShell App Deploy Toolkit with AdminStudio. We keep it up to date with major releases. If there's a new PowerShell App Deploy Toolkit In the meantime, it's easy to update. There's a knowledge base article that can walk you through it. But agreed. Yeah. So repackaging is not that common. When something comes from the package feed module, for example, you could take that silent install command line and publish it directly to Configuration Manager. So now you've got the setup and the silent install details and the detection logic to get that application deployed. You could also take that command line and use it to populate your PowerShell Deploy Toolkit template. So you can customize the template to do any additional checks or footprints or things that you want to do in your template, and AdminStudio can take the command line details and inject them into that so that you can publish the PowerShell Deploy Toolkit method. And then we could also potentially take that same silent command line detail and use that to spin up a virtual machine and automate the repackaging of the application. So if you wanted to convert it to MSIX, for example, you could have a new version pops up and your automation process can do the conversion just as it can do the wrapping, just as it could bypass either of those and deploy the command line details directly. So there's multiple options depending on what you want to do for any given application or the needs of your own environment.
Yeah, it changes from the day where it used to be the guidance was everything that wasn't already an MSI, repackage it into an MSI. And you can still do that today, and there are some advantages to that. But what we heard from a lot of customers is like, well, yeah, if I have to repackage, which means, just for clarity, because repackage sometimes means different things to different folks, but repackaging in our terminology is taking the vendor's install, actually installing it on a usually a virtual machine, and letting something like AdminStudio's repackager capture that end result, turn that into a new Windows installer MSI package, and then work on that and deploy that. And like I said, there's some advantages. You get some of the benefits built in of MSI, but there's some additional effort, and not every vendor EXE is as difficult as they used to be. So some of them are, give me the silent command line switches, no problem. I install and uninstall just fine. So that's where we've heard a lot of people say, well, I'd rather use the vendor install if at all possible, but sometimes I need to supplement that. And that's where the things like PowerShell App Deploy Toolkit come in to allow you to add additional logic, but outside of the installer.
Yeah, no, we have custom installation wizards for all of the MSI-based vendor installs too. So Chrome, for example, has dozens of different options that you could configure, but you'd have to go figure out, well, what properties do I set and what values does it accept to do what I want to do? We provide a much more simplistic form. You check the options you want, and then we create the transform file and associate that with the MSI. Then we retain those choices. So at next time a version comes up, we can get that new version and apply all the same choices. You can't apply the same transform file to the next version of the application, but we know the details to create a new transform file with your same selections. And then that could be deployed as a big command line or wrapped in PowerShell App Deploy Toolkit as well. So that's another kind of value add of taking them through this process. It's speed. It's being up to date with the very latest as soon as it's published. And then it's speed to take it through the process, consistency to do it the same way every time, and then to get it into your deployment system. And one thing I don't think we touched on in the configuration is you can also set some email server details, and AdminStudio will shoot you an email and say, after it's done the automation, tell you, okay, these applications are now waiting for you in Configuration Manager or Intune, Workspace ONE, whatever. So you don't necessarily have to remember, okay, I automate on the weekend, so Monday I need to make sure I see what new stuff is out there. And then we see customers taking advantage of the automated deployment rules in Configuration Manager to say, when a new application is provided by AdminStudio, automatically deploy that to my pilot systems. So not necessarily to production, We still do recommend testing, which is why a ringed deployment approach is also pretty popular, where you have maybe 50 machines get it first, and then a week later, 100 or a couple of hundred or a couple of thousand, and you just start ramping it up. The idea being that if there's a problem with that first 50, you can go in and pull the plug, versus, you have to call and get feedback and remember to take it to the next step. There's a lot of automation options in deployment, in Configuration Manager and these different deployment systems, which is also, key to AdminStudio's role versus the deployment system's role. We're trying to get you what you need as quickly as possible with the quality and customizations you need, but it's your deployment system and all the power that it has to actually execute on that and implement the updates in your environment.
Yeah. Quickly, there was a question on, is there a link to this recording? Right? We'll have a link in the next couple of days of this, so no problems there. And then there was a question is, will there be a session this year that talks about AdminStudio and some of the features that it provides for new users that are new to AdminStudio? So for that, I would say, right, we have a great blog that Bob and Kieran on this call keep up to date. And every time we have a new release of AdminStudio, they do a great blog post, and you guys put some videos together that talk about the latest releases, as well as in our documentation, we have release notes. But sometimes it's nice to watch a video and see the new features in action. So I'd say check those out. Everything, I think we tout our community. So certainly check that out. And we have, exactly. So there's that blog that I mentioned there. There's an active forum, so you can search for questions and get your information, your answers there. You can post new ones, questions there. But that blog post that has videos of new releases. There's a learning center where we have a series of videos that if you are new to AdminStudio and just learning how to use it, you can go through those videos, and talks about how to set up AdminStudio, how to go through repackaging, wrapping of applications, MSIX, and more. So certainly check out Community. It's a great resource. It's where if you're an AdminStudio customer, you can create cases with our support team if you need some additional effort and help as well. So yeah, so all that and more, check that out.
Yeah, but we do try to provide a lot of, there's a getting starting guide. There's a lot of
Sure.
getting started type material, but so just AdminStudio, intro for new customers is something we could try to approach. We have been trying to keep the topics a little less product focused, but let it sneak in where it naturally makes sense. But if there's something specific about AdminStudio you'd like to see a session on, we could definitely take that up. So use the Q&A here, or we have a forum post in the community where we're soliciting feedback on what topics you'd like to have us discuss. And we're always struggling for what's an interesting thing to talk about. We never know how the questions are going to come in. So any ideas you want to feed us will be seriously considered, because we're looking hard for what it is to talk about next. Our next session will be in March, and like was stated, the video will be available within the next couple of days, and the registration for the next session will also be available within a couple of days. So please watch out for that, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.